It started on an ordinary day, a day that would soon become a memory for the entire human race. The skies were clear, and the sun shone brightly over cities and towns that were bustling with life. But in an instant, everything changed. The world looked up, and there, far above the clouds, was something no one had ever seen before. It wasn't an airplane, a satellite, or anything the world's best scientists could explain. It was something far beyond human understanding. A Zorthari ship. Towering and radiant, it glowed with an energy that no human technology could replicate. It moved slowly, with a power that sent a chill through the air, as if it were a living thing, hovering with purpose and mystery. Humanity didn't know what to think at first. People stared at it in disbelief, not knowing whether it was a sign of something good or something terrible. Scientists scrambled to get data from telescopes. Military forces started mobilizing, and governments panicked. What was this strange object? Where did it come from? And most importantly, who or what was inside it? All across the globe, the uncertainty and fear began to spread like wildfire. No one had answers. But one thing was clear: this wasn't an ordinary event. This wasn't just a new discovery. This was something that could change everything. As the ship hovered over major cities, it released an energy pulse that knocked out electrical systems everywhere. The world fell silent. No one could speak. The sheer force of the pulse left people trembling. It wasn't just an electromagnetic disruption. It was something far deeper, something that struck at the core of human understanding. The governments quickly realized that they were facing something far more advanced than anything they had ever imagined. This wasn't a military craft. This wasn't a simple weapon or tool. This was an entity that transcended anything the human race had ever known. The Zorthari were here, and they were not here to negotiate. Minutes felt like hours as the ship loomed larger in the sky. Then, with no warning, a voice boomed from the ship, an ancient, resonating voice that seemed to echo inside the minds of everyone on Earth. It spoke in a language that no one recognized, but somehow it made sense. We are the Zorthari. We have come to claim what is ours. Bow before us, and you will be spared. Resist, and you will be destroyed. The voice didn't come through radios or speakers. It was inside their heads, touching every living person, every animal, every human being. They could all hear it, as if the words were meant for them alone. The feeling was overpowering. A weight on the mind, a command that couldn't be ignored. The world was stunned. Governments met in panic. Military forces were put on high alert. Yet the most powerful armies on Earth were helpless in the face of such an advanced presence. The Zorthari had not come to negotiate. They had come to rule. They didn't need to land on Earth to show their power. The mere presence of their ship in the sky was enough to make entire nations fall into line. They controlled the atmosphere itself, bending the very air to their will. Nothing in Earth's arsenal could stop them. The question that ran through everyone's minds was clear. Who were the Zorthari? What were they? No one knew. They appeared to be made of energy, but not in the way that humans understood energy. The Zorthari were something beyond comprehension. They were beings who could manipulate the forces of nature, control minds, and bend time and space to their desires. Some ancient texts hinted at beings like them, gods, ancient powers that once ruled the stars. But these were just stories, myths passed down through generations. To the people of Earth, the idea that gods could be real seemed like nonsense. Until now. As the Zorthari continued to float high above Earth, their ships released smaller drones, buzzing around like swarms of wasps. The drones moved with incredible speed and precision, scanning everything, analyzing everything. People who tried to escape or hide found that there was no place to run. The Zorthari could see through walls, track movements, and even read thoughts. It wasn't long before the first of humanity's cities was brought to its knees. The drones surrounded the buildings, disintegrating structures with beams of focused energy. The military tried to fire missiles, but they were stopped mid-air, as if the missiles were nothing more than toys. It became clear to humanity there was no hope. They were too powerful. Then, another message. This one, even more chilling than the first. You are insignificant. You are no more than insects to us. Your civilization will be erased, and you will be given no mercy. Your gods were wrong to give you freedom. You will bow, or you will be destroyed. The world watched in silence as this message echoed across all channels. It was as if the Zorthari had already decided humanity's fate. Every nation, every person, felt the weight of their words. The Zorthari had made their presence known, and there was nothing anyone could do about it. The world was powerless, nothing more than a speck in the eyes of beings who considered themselves gods. But amid this terror, there was a flicker of hope. Some humans refused to bow. There were whispers of a plan, a way to fight back. A group of scientists and military leaders, those who refused to accept their fate, had begun to work on a secret project, one that could challenge the Zorthari. But they knew it wouldn't be easy. The Zorthari had vast knowledge and technology, and they seemed to control everything. But humans were known for one thing: their resilience. They had faced countless challenges before and always found a way to survive. The question now was, would they find a way to survive this? As the Zorthari ships hovered over cities, humanity held its breath. It was not just a fight for survival. It was a battle for their freedom, their identity, and their future. The stakes were higher than ever, and the fate of Earth hung in the balance. The Zorthari had arrived, and the world was not ready for what was to come. For days, the world had been paralyzed by fear. The Zorthari gods hovered above, their ships glowing in the sky like eternal flames, casting an oppressive shadow over every corner of the earth. Nations had crumbled under their might, and the helplessness of humanity was laid bare for all to see. Cities lay in ruins, and governments had already begun surrendering to the alien invaders. The Zorthari had proven their power, their mind control, and their ruthless demand for submission. It seemed that resistance was not an option. Yet deep in the heart of Earth, a small spark of defiance was beginning to ignite. In the shadows of global panic, a group of scientists, military strategists, and independent thinkers began to meet in secret. They were ordinary people, no different from the millions who had already bowed to the Zorthari. But they had something that no alien could ever predict: human ingenuity. They knew they were outmatched in power, that they were facing beings capable of destroying entire cities with a single thought. But they also knew something the Zorthari did not. Humans had always found a way to survive, even when all seemed lost. The resistance was born from this unyielding will to live. It began with a handful of scientists working in abandoned laboratories, building off knowledge that had once seemed impossible. They started to develop weapons, simple at first, but powerful enough to challenge the Zorthari's control over the planet. They discovered that the Zorthari's psychic abilities relied on a network of energy fields, and with the right tools, it might be possible to disrupt these fields. But this was just the beginning. The resistance knew that they had to act quickly. The Zorthari were not just an invading force. They were everywhere, watching, listening, and waiting. The clock was ticking. As the weeks passed, the resistance grew, although still hidden, like a whisper in the wind. They reached out to the remnants of Earth's military forces, those who had not yet been completely controlled by the Zorthari's power, and gathered them under one cause: freedom. These survivors were tough, battle-hardened soldiers who had faced countless dangers before, but nothing compared to the terrifying might of the Zorthari. They were afraid, yes, but they were also determined. They knew that if they did not fight, Earth would be lost forever. The Resistance's first move was small but calculated. They launched a series of covert attacks on Zorthari supply lines, striking their communication networks and their energy sources. It was a risky move, one that could easily end in total failure, But it was the first time since the Zorthari's arrival that humanity had taken control of anything. When the first strike was successful, the members of the resistance felt a glimmer of hope that had been missing for so long. They had fought back, and they had won. The Zorthari, caught off guard by this small act of defiance, responded swiftly. Their drones, which had once been so focused on surveillance, began searching for the resistance, scanning every corner of Earth for any sign of rebellion. But the resistance was clever. They had learned the Zorthari's tactics, their weaknesses, and their patterns. They moved swiftly, disappearing into the underground, into the dense forests, and into the mountains. The resistance didn't just fight. They used the Earth's terrain to their advantage. They were everywhere and nowhere at the same time. The Zorthari's psychic abilities, which had once, and sending out messages to the entire world. These messages weren't just about fighting back. They were about hope. They showed people that they weren't alone, that there was a force rising up to challenge the gods. The world, which had once been paralyzed by fear, began to awaken. More people joined the resistance. The underground movements that had once been whispers now became a roar, spreading across continents. People were no longer sitting idle. They were fighting too. But the Zorthari didn't stay passive for long. They understood that the humans had begun to organize, and they were not pleased. In a terrifying demonstration of their power, the Zorthari used their advanced technology to send a massive energy pulse across the Earth. The pulse disrupted everything: electricity, communications, and even the human mind itself. For a moment, the world fell silent. Cities were plunged into darkness. People screamed in fear as their thoughts became clouded, their minds clouded by the Zorthari's overwhelming presence. It was as if the gods were reminding the humans that they were nothing. But humanity was resilient. The resistance had prepared for this moment. They had anticipated the Zorthari's next move. With the power of human determination and resourcefulness, they had created a countermeasure, a device that could block the psychic pulse. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough. The device flickered to life as the pulse hit, protecting the minds of those closest to it and allowing the resistance to regroup. It was a small victory, but it was enough to show that the Zorthari were not invincible. Across the world, the resistance began to grow even stronger. It was no longer a small, hidden group. It was a force, a movement that could not be ignored. People from every walk of life joined in. Farmers, doctors, teachers, and soldiers, all uniting under one banner: the will to survive. Even as the Zorthari unleashed more devastating attacks, the resistance held strong, pushing back whenever and wherever they could. It was a war of attrition. Humanity might not be able to defeat the Zorthari in a single battle, but they could wear them down, chip by chip, until the gods realized that Earth was not a planet to be taken lightly. The world, once broken and fearful, was now united in its defiance. The resistance had awakened, and they were no longer hiding in fear. They were a force to be reckoned with, and as their strikes grew more daring, they knew they had something the Zorthari did not: the strength of human spirit. The battle for Earth had just begun, and the Zorthari were about to learn that humans would never give up without a fight. The world had changed forever. Humanity had been crushed under the heel of the Zorthari gods, their might unmatched and their demands absolute. Yet, despite all the despair and hopelessness that gripped Earth, something stirred within the hearts of humans, a sense of defiance, a burning desire to survive. The resistance, once a secret and fragile network, had grown into something more, something stronger. It was no longer just about survival. It was about fighting back, showing the invaders that Earth would not yield without a fight. The first battle was not just a fight for victory. It was a battle for the very soul of humanity. The plan had been set in motion for weeks, its details kept secret even from the members of the resistance themselves. They knew this battle would be a turning point, the first real confrontation with the Zorthari gods. If they lost, they feared it might be the end. But if they won, even a small victory, it would send a message. Humans were not to be underestimated. Earth was not a planet to be conquered easily. The Resistance had learned from their previous encounters with the Zorthari. Attacks on supply lines and communication networks were important, but this time they would strike directly at the heart of their enemy's power. The battle would take place in a remote region, hidden away from the prying eyes of the Zorthari's surveillance systems. A small military base, once a hub for research and development, had been taken over by the Resistance. It was there that the humans had developed their first major weapon, a powerful EMP device capable of disabling the Zorthari's advanced technology, even their psychic energy fields. It wasn't perfect, but it was humanity's best shot at taking down the Zorthari, at least for a moment. The Resistance soldiers were ready, armed with a mix of traditional weapons and the experimental gear that had been adapted from their scientific breakthroughs. They were not as technologically advanced as the Zorthari, but they had something far more valuable: courage. The soldiers were nervous, their hearts racing with both fear and anticipation. They knew the Zorthari gods were powerful, more powerful than anything humanity had ever encountered. But they had also seen the gods' weaknesses. They had learned that as the first waves of Resistance fighters moved into position, the ground shook with the arrival of the Zorthari ships. Massive and terrifying, they hovered above, casting long shadows over the battlefield. The sky was filled with a low hum, the sound of the Zorthari's psychic energy gathering. The gods themselves were not present. This battle would be fought by their soldiers, their machines, and their drones. But the presence of the Zorthari was undeniable. The Resistance had expected this. They had prepared for this moment. They had one chance to make it count. The first wave of Resistance soldiers advanced under cover of smoke and darkness. They moved quickly, silently, their every step measured and deliberate. The Zorthari had superior technology, but the Resistance had the advantage of knowing the terrain. They had spent weeks studying the battlefield, learning every ridge and every hiding place. It was their home turf, and they intended to use it to their advantage. The first shots rang out, the sound of gunfire echoing across the barren landscape. The Zorthari's drones retaliated swiftly, their weapons lighting up the sky in blinding flashes. But the Resistance wasn't just relying on brute force. They had learned the hard way that they needed to be smarter than their enemies. The EMP device, a bulky and dangerous piece of technology, was their secret weapon. If they could get it into position, it would cripple the Zorthari's machines and give them the opening they needed. But getting the device to the Zorthari's power core was not going to be easy. The Resistance fighters moved through the battlefield, dodging blasts and returning fire whenever they could. The Zorthari drones were relentless, their weapons precise, their movements calculated. Yet the humans pressed on, determined to reach their objective. In the midst of the chaos, a young soldier, Private Sarah Holt, found herself at the front lines, the EMP device slung over her shoulder. She had been part of the Resistance since the beginning, and she knew this mission could be the last one she ever undertook. But she also knew that if the EMP failed, Earth would fall. Her hands were steady as she moved forward, despite the terror swirling around her. She had learned to block out the fear, to focus on the task at hand. The lives of millions rested on her shoulders. Sarah's team reached the power core, a massive structure that housed the Zorthari's control center. It was heavily guarded, but the Resistance had already planted explosives in key locations to weaken its defenses. They set the EMP device in place, praying it would work. But as they activated it, a deafening sound filled the air, a hum that vibrated through the very ground. The Zorthari had anticipated this move. They had been preparing for the Resistance's attack, and now they were ready to strike back. The power core reacted violently, sending shockwaves through the battlefield. The EMP device flickered, sparking wildly, but it held its ground. For a moment, everything seemed to freeze. The Zorthari's drones fell from the sky, their systems fried by the EMP's energy. The Resistance soldiers looked up in awe, realizing that they had succeeded, but it was only for a moment. The Zorthari's retaliation came quickly. Their remaining forces, though disoriented by the loss of their technology, began to regroup. The ground shook once again as massive Zorthari war machines, larger than anything the Resistance had ever seen, emerged from the depths of the earth. They were unlike anything the Resistance had ever fought. Monstrous, towering machines with weapons that could obliterate entire battalions in a single strike. But the Resistance did not back down. They had fought too long, too hard, to surrender now. The battle raged on, the sounds of explosions and gunfire filling the air. The Resistance soldiers fought with everything they had, knowing that the fate of Earth rested on their shoulders. Sarah Holt and her team continued to press forward, their resolve unbroken. They had made it this far, and they would not give up now. The Zorthari were powerful, but they had underestimated one thing: human determination. The Resistance, though small in number, was not going to stop until they had taken back their world. Every bullet fired, every step taken, every life lost. It all mattered. The first battle was far from over, but the Resistance knew one thing for sure: the fight had only just begun. The sky above Earth had never seemed so heavy. The air was thick with the scent of burning cities, the echoes of gunfire, and the roar of engines. Earth, a world once teeming with life and hope, had become a battlefield. The Zorthari, an unstoppable force that had come from beyond the stars, had waged war on humanity with unmatched power. And now, after years of struggle, humanity had one final chance to end it all. This was the war that would determine whether Earth would remain a place for humanity or fall into the hands of invaders who saw humans as nothing more than insects to be crushed beneath their feet. The Resistance had grown in strength over the years, but so had the Zorthari. The first battles had been fought with desperation, a small group of survivors trying to find hope against an overwhelming force. But now, humanity had united. The Resistance was no longer just a small band of rebels. It was an army, a force to be reckoned with. They had spent years researching, building alliances, and learning everything they could about the Zorthari. They understood their enemy's strengths and weaknesses, and now they were ready for the final confrontation. This was the war to end all wars. Either humanity would rise, or the Earth would become a new home for the Zorthari gods. The plan was simple, but incredibly dangerous. The Zorthari's most powerful weapon, a massive ship that could obliterate entire cities with a single blast, was located deep within their base of operations. If the Resistance could destroy this ship, they would cripple the Zorthari's ability to wage war on Earth. But getting to it was going to be near impossible. The base was heavily guarded, surrounded by fleets of warships, and protected by a force field that made any direct assault suicidal. The Resistance had only one chance: a full-scale assault, a decoy to draw the Zorthari's attention, while a small strike team made their way in to destroy the ship. It was risky. It was dangerous. But it was humanity's only hope. The assault began at dawn. The Resistance's forces, made up of soldiers from every corner of Earth, stormed the battlefield. Tanks, fighter jets, and infantry clashed with the Zorthari's advanced war machines. Explosions rocked the ground as both sides threw everything they had into the fight. The Zorthari retaliated swiftly, their warships firing lasers that cut through the Resistance's lines like hot knives through butter. But humanity didn't falter. They pushed forward, knowing that this was their last chance. Every explosion, every burst of gunfire, every life lost brought them one step closer to their goal. At the heart of the chaos, Captain Daniel Hayes led his team toward the Zorthari's fortress. He had seen countless battles, had fought in dozens of skirmishes, but this one felt different. This was the final push. He could feel the weight of it on his shoulders, the burden of leading his people into what could be their last battle. But he also knew this was a fight worth fighting. The Zorthari had taken so much from humanity: cities, lives, hope. Now it was time to take back what was theirs. The team moved swiftly through the wreckage, using the chaos of the assault to cover their advance. Captain Hayes' team was small, just 10 soldiers, but they were the best humanity had to offer. They had trained for months, prepared for this moment. Their mission was clear: infiltrate the Zorthari fortress, plant explosives on the ship, and escape before the base went down in flames. It sounded simple, but the Zorthari were not going to let them succeed without a fight. As they approached the base's outer walls, the first sign of trouble appeared. Zorthari soldiers, towering and powerful, emerged from hidden doors, their weapons aimed directly at the resistance team. The battle was about to become a whole lot more dangerous. The resistance soldiers fought back with everything they had: guns blazing, knives slashing, and grenades exploding. But the Zorthari were relentless. Their strength, their speed, their advanced armor, all of it made them nearly impossible to defeat in direct combat. Captain Hayes knew they couldn't afford to waste time fighting. Their mission had to come first. He barked orders, directing his team toward the inner courtyard where the ship was docked. They fought their way through, the air thick with gunfire and the sounds of their enemies' war cries. The resistance soldiers were tired, many of them wounded, but they kept moving forward. They had no choice. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, they reached the Zorthari ship. It was massive, a behemoth of metal and alien technology. The sight of it took their breath away. It was the key to everything, the Zorthari's ultimate weapon. Sergeant Mia Lee, one of the team's best demolition experts, wasted no time. She began planting the explosives while the others set up defenses. The minutes ticked by, each one feeling like an hour. Captain Hayes couldn't shake the feeling that they were running out of time. The Zorthari were closing in. They needed to finish this and get out. Suddenly, the ground trembled. A loud roar echoed from the distance. The resistance fighters turned to see a massive Zorthari war machine, one even larger than anything they had seen before, moving toward them. The machine was unstoppable. Its weapons could level entire cities. If they didn't stop it, their mission would be in vain. With no time to waste, Captain Hayes made a decision. He ordered his team to fall back while he stayed behind to buy them time. He knew it was a suicide mission, but there was no other choice. The resistance couldn't lose this fight. Private Jason Carter, a young soldier who had looked up to Hayes from the beginning, protested, but Hayes didn't listen. He had to do this. Humanity had to have a chance. Captain Hayes turned, running toward the massive war machine. He fired his weapon as he ran, hoping to slow it down just long enough for his team to escape. The war machine responded with a blast of energy that knocked him off his feet. His body slammed into the ground, the pain overwhelming. But he didn't stop. He dragged himself up, determined to finish the job. He planted one last explosive on the war machine and triggered it. The explosion was deafening. The war machine collapsed in on itself, its massive form crumbling into the ground. But Hayes knew that the battle was far from over. The Zorthari were ruthless, and they would stop at nothing to destroy humanity. The resistance soldiers, now reunited, had to make their way out of the fortress before the explosives they planted on the ship detonated. As the countdown reached its final seconds, Captain Hayes and his team raced for their lives. They could hear the rumbling of the explosion behind them, the sound of the Zorthari's fortress collapsing in on itself. They had done it. They had destroyed the ship. The Zorthari's most powerful weapon was gone. But at what cost? The resistance had won, but the war was far from over. Earth was still under threat. The Zorthari gods would not forgive this defeat easily. The fight had only just begun, but one thing was clear: humanity would not go down without a fight. And this time, they had something the Zorthari didn't: hope. The world was silent, eerily so. The once thriving cities, now in ruins, bore the scars of a war that had shaken the very foundations of Earth. The Zorthari, a ruthless alien race, had come to Earth years ago, declaring their dominion over humanity. Their ships blotted out the sun, and their armies, each warrior a towering figure of immense power, had crushed all who stood before them. For years, humanity fought back, a resistance built on desperation and a burning desire to survive. But now, at the precipice of total annihilation, something unexpected happened. A flicker of hope rose from the ashes of destruction, and it came from humanity's most unexpected weapon, unity. The Zorthari, who had once been considered gods by many, found themselves in a struggle they had never anticipated. Their vast fleets, their advanced weaponry, and their superior strength were all failing them. The resistance, though outnumbered, had become a symbol of defiance, an unrelenting force that refused to yield. It was in this final stretch of the war that the Zorthari learned just how powerful the human spirit truly was. But the resistance, no matter how determined, still needed one last push to defeat the Zorthari once and for all. That push came in the form of Captain Ethan Matthews. Matthews had been a part of the resistance from the beginning. A former soldier, he had lost everything: his family, his home, his future, when the Zorthari first arrived. But what they hadn't taken was his will to fight. He had risen through the ranks, leading countless battles and becoming the heart of the human resistance. Now, with the Zorthari Empire crumbling under the pressure of constant rebellion, Matthews knew that the final battle was at hand. This was the moment that would decide the fate of Earth. The resistance had gathered its forces for one final assault. The Zorthari had a stronghold, a colossal structure hidden deep within the planet's most dangerous terrain. It was a fortress built to withstand anything, designed by the Zorthari themselves to be their last stand. Inside, they held the key to their dominance, the Zorthari core, an immense power source that fueled their war machines and their strength. If the resistance could destroy it, the Zorthari would be powerless. But breaking into their stronghold would require a force unlike anything humanity had ever mustered. It would take everything they had and more. Captain Matthews stood before his soldiers, a sea of faces, some full of determination, others marked with the weariness of years of battle. "We fought long enough," he said, his voice steady and strong, though he could feel the weight of the moment pressing on his chest. "We've lost so much, but this is the end. We end it today. No more suffering, no more fear. We fight, we win, and we take back our world. This is our last chance. We can't afford to fail." His words echoed in their hearts. They had nothing left to lose, and yet everything to fight for. The plan was simple in theory, though incredibly dangerous in practice. They would infiltrate the Zorthari stronghold under the cover of darkness, avoiding detection long enough to plant explosives at the heart of the Zorthari core. Once detonated, the core would collapse, taking the entire Zorthari Empire with it. The explosion would cripple their war efforts for good, but getting to it would be the challenge of a lifetime. As the resistance made its way toward the stronghold, the air was thick with tension. Every step they took felt like an eternity, the oppressive silence of the terrain around them amplifying the uncertainty in their hearts. The Zorthari were everywhere, patrolling the area with deadly precision. Their advanced sensors would detect even the slightest movement, and one mistake could mean their death. But the resistance was prepared. They moved swiftly, using the cover of darkness to their advantage. Each soldier knew their role, and they worked as one, a well-oiled machine of defiance. The trek was long, but they eventually reached the outskirts of the Zorthari stronghold. The massive structure loomed before them, its dark silhouette like a shadow cast over the land. It was a sight to behold, a testament to the Zorthari's technological prowess. But it was also their downfall. The resistance had studied it for years, learning its weaknesses, and now, armed with this knowledge, they were ready to strike. As Matthews and his team infiltrated the fortress, the enormity of their task became clear. The Zorthari stronghold was a labyrinth, filled with high-tech defenses and deadly traps. Every hallway, every room, every corner was a potential death trap. But the resistance pushed on, each member of the team moving with purpose, their resolve as unyielding as the walls that surrounded them. Matthews led the charge, his mind focused on the mission. He had been through countless battles, but this one felt different. It was more than just a fight for survival. It was a fight for everything that had been lost. Minutes turned to hours as they navigated the fortress, evading Zorthari patrols and bypassing security systems. Tension hung in the air, thick as smoke. The resistance was close now, the heart of the fortress just ahead. But as they neared their objective, disaster struck. A Zorthari war machine, a towering monstrosity of metal and firepower, appeared from nowhere. It was an unstoppable force, its weapons capable of leveling entire buildings. The resistance had no choice but to fight back. The battle was fierce. The Zorthari war machine unleashed a barrage of energy blasts, each one powerful enough to disintegrate anything in its path. The resistance fought back with everything they had: guns, explosives, and every ounce of courage they could muster. Matthews led the charge, taking down Zorthari soldiers with deadly precision. But even as they fought, they knew they were running out of time. The Zorthari would soon realize what was happening, and reinforcements would be on the way. As the war machine fell, Matthews and his team made one final push. They reached the Zorthari core, the beating heart of the Empire. The core pulsed with energy, its glowing surface a constant reminder of the Zorthari's power. It was a formidable foe in itself, a force that could destroy everything in its path. Matthews looked at his team, their faces a mix of exhaustion and determination. This was it, the moment they had been fighting for. He gave the order to plant the explosives, and within moments, the countdown began. The ground shook as the explosives were set. The team knew they had to get out before the blast, but the Zorthari were already closing in. The alarms blared, signaling the beginning of the end. Matthews and his team fought their way back to the exit, their path now littered with the fallen bodies of their enemies. But they didn't stop. They couldn't afford to. As the final seconds ticked down, Matthews and his team made their escape. The explosion that followed was deafening. The entire fortress shook as the Zorthari core imploded, sending shockwaves through the stronghold. The Zorthari, in all their power, were defeated. But the victory came at a great cost. Many had fallen. The resistance had lost comrades, friends, and leaders. But Earth had been saved. The Zorthari were no more. The battle was over, and humanity had emerged victorious. As Matthews stood amidst the ruins, the sun rising over the horizon, he knew this was just the beginning. The Earth had been saved, but the fight for its future would continue. The Zorthari had fallen, but humanity had risen, and now they would rebuild, stronger than ever before.